Hello and welcome to Sips and Substance, where we distill politics down to its essence. I'm Justin. We have Jonathan over here,
Hello.
and we are going to talk about the elephant in the room, which are tariffs, Liberation Day, and how our retirement accounts are doing.
Let's try to avoid that, or it'll be more like crying in your beer day, and nobody wants to watch us do that. But yeah, it's you kind of have to talk about tariffs, and it's kind of crazy because there are all kinds of other things that happen. Like, oh, we'll talk about that definitely. Oh, well, never mind, we'll talk about this, and like, nope, and we'll get to mention a couple of these things later on. But tariffs certainly are the elephant in the room. If it will be more, even if it will be more expensive to come by an elephant in the immediate future.
Right. So, we're going to talk about what happened, how the market's been reacting, the domestic political responses, and how other nations are responding. And we're also going to briefly talk about the special elections. We had two congressional races in Florida, and we also had a Supreme Court case not Supreme Court case, but a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin.
Yeah, the state Supreme Court there, yes. And one of the things that I thought for sure, oh, we'll talk about this, is Trump has Laura Loomer into the White House, and she gives him a list of people that are not loyal enough to him. And he says, oh, well, get them out. And that includes our head of the NSA. And those of you that aren't intimately familiar with the NSA is in charge of basically our cybersecurity. And we get rid of him because Laura Loomer thinks he's a bad guy. And it's just, I don't even know. I don't even know how you begin with that. But we can't talk about that because the tariffs thing kind of won the day. And it doesn't even mention the fact that the Republicans are planning to blow up basically the filibuster in the Senate and bypass the parliamentarian to do reconciliation without even doing reconciliation. Also, huge news. But again, for this week, that's not our huge news, I guess.
We can't devote our time to a 6-hour podcast, so it is what it is.
Well, I'm guessing that our viewers wouldn't really be interested in seeing us talk forever and a day. Certainly because they don't get to enjoy the beer. And this week, I'm having some empathetic beer with our overseas allies and suppliers. I have my Munich Hofbräuhaus t-shirt, a Stein directly from there, and to fill it this week, I have chosen to get a Paulaner's Münchner Lager, genuine Munich, just typical Munich beer, just very classic, very mellow, very easy drinking, not particularly hoppy. It's got the typical lager hops, so it's a good, solid German beer, which is going to be sadly much more expensive as we go forward.
All right, so let's talk about Liberation Day. And to quote President Trump, "For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations, near and far, both friend and foe alike."
It doesn't sound like something your friends would do to you, I just got to say.
Yeah. Great friends we have.
If I show up to your house and start pillaging and raping, I don't think you're going to welcome me to get back.
So obviously these are hysterics, but unfortunately this mindset is driving our economic policy. So what did Trump announce? He announced a 10% tariff on all U.S. imports. So that's everyone's baseline. And if you're one of the lucky rapers, well, you happen to get more tariffs.
The interesting thing about it is I still think that nobody's really exactly sure, looking at their number that they were assigned, where that came from. Right? It's hard to figure out exactly why the tariffs are, what they are, but they're just these almost randomly seeming numbers across people who are friends, foes, and everybody in between.
Yeah, so here are some highlights. We have 32% tariff on Taiwan, but notably we exempted semiconductors, which happens to be most of the trade. So, all right, what's the point there? Canada was exempt, which is great since they're one of our largest trading partners. But no, they're not exempt from the previous tariffs that we put on them in March. China got hit hard with 34% tariffs. Japan had 24% tariffs put on them, which is unfortunate because they announced the Nintendo Switch 2. And I was excited to put a pre-order in, but nope.
And yeah, and these numbers, they're just all over the place. Like, why are we tariffing Norfolk Island? Like, who even knows what Norfolk Island is? I didn't know there was a country called Norfolk Island. Did you?
Well, it's not a country; it's an Australian-owned territory.
They get a separate tariff than Australia?
They did, and that's what's interesting. And so that gave people a hint at where these numbers were coming from. And so, what it really boiled down to is you take U.S. exports, subtract the U.S. imports, and divide it by the imports. So it's the trade imbalance, the ratio of your trade imbalance. That's all it is. And it's funny that the U.S. trade representative tried to say, "Hey, we have this really fancy formula where we're looking at price elasticity and all that stuff." And people looked at it and they said, "No, it's really just exports minus imports, all divided by imports." And I can't think of a dumber way to come up with trade policy, because obviously you're going to have some countries that have really cheap labor. They're going to export a lot of goods to us.
Well, you could use darts, but I mean, other than that, I think you're right. And what all this happily ignores, right, is that yes, we have trade imbalances. We get goods from places, but we have a massive imbalance in terms of services, right? People give Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Meta all kinds of money that we're not spending on the technology services in those countries. So again, when you think, oh, it's a trade imbalance, it's bad, maybe, but there's also a services imbalance and a capital investment imbalance. There's all kinds of imbalances, which makes it that I'm a long way from me going about to agree with you and saying, yes, this is just ridiculous. And it's kind of sort of a piece with what we talked about before. It's like, hey, the United States is willingly and intentionally giving up its role as the number one military power in the world, and talked about how that was just unprecedented, basically in the history of the world. Well, here we are doing the same thing with economics. We are clearly the number one economy in the world, guiding a system that we created that works to our benefit, and we're saying, screw it. Let's blow it all to hell and try something else. And some of the initial shocks, fairly pessimistic, right?
Right. So we had trillions of dollars wiped out from the stock market. Dow, I believe on Friday, dropped about 2,000 points, and the day before it was about 1,500 points. So I think this is Wall Street's reaction to saying, oh, this guy's serious. Wall Street was sort of hedging their bets. They figured, oh, you know what? Trump talks a tough game, but hey, the first 4 years of the Trump administration, we made out pretty well. Stocks went up tremendously. And if you remove COVID from the equation, things were going pretty good. And so they figured, oh, we're just going to get more of the same. Boy, were they wrong.
Oh, boy. And I think that just to illustrate this a little bit, I have a good friend who's from Guyana, used to be the ambassador to the United States from Guyana, still highly involved in what's going on there. And I was visiting him this week, and we talked a lot about what's going on and how this is impacting their country. And it's kind of like a really good microcosm of what this is doing to our friends and how it's messing up pretty much everything for no good reason. I can't say pretty much everything, but the economy as well as our foreign policy, right? If you are as obsessed with foreign policy, with the news as we are, you might have noticed that Marco Rubio was in Guyana last week, and he was there explicitly to reinforce our support for Guyana. They're in a conflict over their border with Venezuela, meaning Venezuela wants to take part of Guyana because it's rich in minerals and oil, and they're threatening all kinds of stuff. And Marco Rubio is there to say, nope, you better not, because our Navy can go anywhere in the world. And basically a Trump sort of kind of threat that Venezuela better not mess with Guyana. And Guyana's very pleased with this. Like, hey, that's because they have no army to speak of. If Venezuela was to invade, Guyana would not be able to stop them, right? Unless the U.S. is there as support. So this is the kind of thing they like to hear. It's like, yeah, we're an important ally for them. They like us because, hey, there's these minerals and we already get oil from them, right? So right now there's a trade deficit with Guyana because we import a lot of oil from Guyana, right? But that oil is exempt from tariffs, right? So there is a $4.1 billion trade deficit. Almost all of that is from oil, but the oil is exempt from tariffs. Beyond that, the oil is pumped by an American company and sold to Americans. So Exxon specifically is in charge of this. Exxon is causing this trade deficit, and they're benefiting from it because they're getting all the profits, right? And so Guyana and their other products, like Guyanese rum is one of them that I partake of from time to time. But 38% tariff on that because Exxon is making a lot of money off Guyanese oil and providing oil to the United States. So despite the fact that we're their good friend and we're going to defend them against Venezuela, we're going to punish them because Exxon is using their natural resources to make a lot of money. Right? And so the Guyanese are just like, what is going on here? They don't even know how to react.
Right. And I think this just goes to show you that the Trump administration has no clue what it's doing. We've hit on various elements of the Trump regime, ranging from the Justice Department policy, military policy, and from what we can see, a fair assessment is that they are both incompetent and malicious. And this tariff policy that they've enacted on the entire world really encompasses all that.
Yeah, I think you couldn't find a better way to mess with your own success economically than this, right? The United States is still the wealthiest country in the world. Trump likes to say, oh, we're a failing nation. Our economy is... No, our economy is really good, right? What we do have is a lot of wealth disparity, meaning the rich people are really rich, people in the middle are kind of and the people on the low end are really poor. We could maybe try to fix that. This does nothing to do that, right? It's just, I can't tell you what it's for because I don't really understand it. And I think you're right that they don't either. And it puts us, I know we've talked about this briefly, and it puts us in this really weird position I've never been in before, but I can't, even with presidents I disagreed with, I always hoped that, certainly in foreign relations, that things would work out because it's for our country. You root for the U.S. as an American. I don't even know how to do that with this. I don't know what the goal is. I don't know what would be success. I don't even know. And I don't think I'm alone. I would be very surprised if they could, they haven't yet, tell us what's the goal, what's the benchmarks, what's success look like. I'm at sea on all those things.
Right. So I think that's a good transition point for the domestic reaction, because even on the right, there's mixed responses. We have conservative commentator Ben Shapiro, who is just excoriating this policy. He is really going after Trump and saying that this is monumentally stupid. You have a lot of folks at the National Review doing the same thing. And on the other side, you have folks like Benny Johnson, who has this amazing quote. He said, "Nobody ever had their net worth carved into their tombstone. Doesn't even matter when you're on your deathbed. Who cares?" I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah, it's just like, okay then, right? And it's just, you see things like Fox News, as you know, you talked about before. You noted this as like they're pretending everything's great, right? All of a sudden, there's no stock ticker on the bottom of the screen at Fox News.
Right.
What do you say about that? And they say, oh, don't worry about your 401k. It will rebound. It's like, will it? Right? And will it do it completely? There's no guarantee that the people who are upset by this are suddenly going to change their mind just because Trump tells them, don't worry, this is part of the plan. Like, what are we going to do? How do we even know? We have no plan. He's told us no plan. And their excuse is, well, this is all part of the plan, right? He keeps it close to the vest. He likes to stir things up. He likes the chaos, which I think is all true. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a plan for a good outcome underneath all the churn.
Right. So you have Trump's son. He's saying, hey, these are effectively a negotiating tool. We're going to get some better deals. And the first people who come and make a deal with Trump, they're going to get the best deal. And if you're last in line, you're basically fucked. So that seems to suggest that the tariffs are temporary and they're just a negotiating tool.
On the other hand, Trump says exactly the opposite.
Right. So Trump's labor secretary has been pushing the idea that we're going to bring back manufacturing jobs to this country. Well, in order to do that, the tariffs have to be here for a long enough period of time where it makes sense for the companies to actually build out a manufacturing base here and start manufacturing.
Yep.
Clothes in, say, Cambodia aren't going to just be made in America cheaply. It's just not going to happen. And so when the labor secretary is just pushing this, I don't even know how to respond to it because no American is going to make Nikes, and Americans aren't going to pay, say, $60 for Nikes in America if they're made in America. They're going to cost like $200, $300. It just doesn't make any sense.
I think that it gets back to sort of one of the problems with their whole proposition, right? We're going to bring back manufacturing jobs and we're going to make American economy a manufacturing economy again. Well, one, you might bring back some manufacturing jobs, but those jobs are going to be, at least a majority for robots and not people. You crowed about some factory coming back in the first administration, and it was like 15 to 20% of what the factory employed before it left and came back, because nowadays robots are really good at making stuff and you don't necessarily need people to turn a nut, right? You can get a robot to do a lot of that stuff. And if these factories do come back, that's what's going to happen. Also, not going to be a very quick process for most of these things. We may have some unused capacity, but you're not going to just turn it on and all of a sudden start making all the stuff that was cheap over in Cambodia and Vietnam. Beyond that, right? This is something that I haven't really read about at all in the recent discussion that I think we overlook at our own peril. We say these manufacturing jobs are the ideal American job. Really? Right? These are all people that have never spent a day working on an assembly line or even adjacent to an assembly line. And I never worked on an assembly line, but I did work during my college years. I worked one time as a quality control person in a lab in a place that made soaps and cosmetics and things like that. And my job was to go inspect stuff and make sure everything was good with the stuff in terms of the quality. And I got to know some of the assembly line workers, and they were just uniformly freaking miserable, right? It's a horrible, horrible existence to do this all day, every day, for 30 years, right? Nobody who does it is thinking, gee, if only more people could do this, we'd be a much better society, right? And I know not all manufacturing jobs are mind-numbingly dull, but a lot of them are. And it's not necessarily work that people are going to want to do. And they're certainly not going to want to do it at the rate that they can pay people in Vietnam and China. Now, whether we take advantage of this labor is a completely other story. But again, they're not saying we're going to bring back these jobs that people are going to want to have. They say we're going to bring back these jobs in this sector, like making shirts.
Right. And what's funny is that there are some manufacturing jobs that we should have in America. For instance, manufacturing semiconductors. From a national security standpoint, it makes sense to have these.
And military equipment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We should keep doing that here. We should manufacture stuff for the space industry. If we want to do high-end products, that's great too, because then you can absorb, right, the high-end labor costs. But there's no way we can make low-end cheap products with American labor. Only way that could happen here is if we do it completely robotically. If it's completely automated, then potentially we could do it cheaply. But again, you have to build a factory, which isn't going to be anywhere near as cheap as you're doing it somewhere else, right? In terms of economic theory, Trump just either doesn't understand or doesn't even know of, or both, the idea of comparative advantage, where people, if you want your economy to be the best, you do the stuff that you do well, and you trade that to people that do other things well, right? That's kind of how trade is supposed to work.
Yeah, and we have a beautiful relationship right now with, say, the South Koreans and the Japanese, who are making some amazing products for us. I'm sure everyone that we know has a Samsung television or something like that.
I'm a Sony guy to the core when it comes to TVs. And I just bought another one because the ones I've always had have lasted forever, and I will continue to buy Sony. But I will not be happy paying another 32% or whatever the hell they want us to pay. Like you were saying, like we have these good relationships with people. So Vietnam is a really good example of a country that we have actually cultivated a really good relationship with. And a lot of that most recently came about because Trump basically encouraged people to leave China and go to Vietnam with their production. And now they did. That's working really well for them and us. And now we're punishing them for that. It's like, get some sort of story that people can follow. Because you might think that all these things can be nimble and respond to what you want to do instantly. They can't. These supply chains, these factories take a while to get going. Excuse me. And we're blowing all that up.
Right. So let's talk about the Democrats' reaction to this, because it's been a pretty muddled response, I think. On one hand, there's a large segment of the Democratic Party that is pro-labor and pro-tariff, but they're pro-specific tariff. So you have a lot of these folks trying to walk the line between criticizing Trump's policies and being pro-tariff. And then you also have another group of Democrats who they aren't adapting to this situation, right? So they're basically saying Trump is making his donors richer. And it's like, well, look at the stock market. Folks like Zuckerberg, Musk, and Bezos, they've lost billions and billions of dollars over the past couple of days. So they're not getting richer. Everyone's getting poorer. So you need to adapt to the situation. And then lastly, I think there are some Democrats who are correctly saying, hey, you know what? This is a tax on American consumers, and they're just focusing on that.
And I think that deserves a lot more attention. I think that's a good point you brought up, and I'm glad you did. Because this doesn't surprise me because of the Democrats' inability to kind of get a grasp on sort of the roots of this, right? If you think about this, the reason that this is popular amongst the MAGA types is a lot of them feel like they got left behind with globalization, right? And a lot of the people on the left and the free traders on the right as well are talking, hey, you know what? With globalization, everybody wins. Countries are better off because of comparative advantage. And that's true at the macro scale.
Yep.
But at the micro scale, meaning individuals, that's not always true. If you're in an industry that loses, you're a steel worker, right? And the steel plant closes by you. You got to do something else, or you're in deep trouble. I thought when we talked the other day, you were telling me a story about Pittsburgh, and I thought that was really, really instructive about how in Pittsburgh they changed and adopted to new technologies, and Pittsburgh's doing well. Out in the hills, right, the rest of Pennsylvania, middle Pennsylvania, they didn't, and they're still bemoaning the loss of the steel jobs. And that's the MAGA base, right? And so the Democrats have never really been able to say, these are the benefits of free trade. These are the problems with it. This is how we're going to help you, right? And they're grasping for an answer. Trump is saying we're going to do these tariffs and he's going to help you. He's wrong. They're not. But at least he's saying that, and gets the gullible to believe it. The Democrats don't have an answer across the board. And I think you're right that, like, hey, tax on consumers will be there. But again, this is a great opportunity to say, this is the wrong approach to help American workers. The real approach is X. Mm-hmm. And until they come up with something like that, they're not really going to have a strong response.
You have to wonder, though, is this criticism and the correct messaging even going to matter? I think what's really going to affect people's mentality is when they actually start seeing the higher prices. I don't know when we're going to see higher prices, though. It's really going to depend on the industry and whether or not you can replace a foreign good with a domestic good. So, for instance, if you like Spanish wines, I'm sure you can find a satisfactory California wine. That's not going to be a particularly moving issue.
I think you'd be surprised by that, though. Because I think I know
they're already voting Democrat. Don't worry.
I think in wine consumers, people who really like wine, and I'm not a high end really knowing all about wine, but you got like, hey, this wine is good for this. This wine is good for that. And I think there'll be some of that, but people are going to get annoyed. But these aren't the people that's going to matter to what's going on. I think you're going to see the whole suite of economic impacts. That's when people are going to start paying attention. People notice when the stock market goes down because, well, most Americans don't have massive stock portfolios. We have retirement accounts because the Republicans have made sure that we don't have pensions, right? People with pensions, like teachers, doesn't matter all that much what the stock market does in the short term. If you have a 401k, you'll get your letter next month and it'll be like, oh my, right? People will notice that. People will notice when the prices go up. People will really notice when they start getting fired because demand is down because we're going into a recession, right? All these things, it's just, to me, it's a question of how much tolerance for pain does Trump have, and then how much tolerance to pain does the rest of the Republican Party have? Because a lot of them are running again in 2 years.
Right. It's a ticking time bomb. It's just a matter of when it's going to go off and if it's going to be all at once, so to speak, or if it's just going to be this cascading of this wave of destruction over the next 6 months. We'll have to see. So let's talk about the foreign policy ramifications and the foreign reaction. So we've talked about how both political parties are responding to this. Now, I think the biggest response has been China. China has responded with 34% tariffs on all American goods, and they've also prohibited certain entities from doing business in China. So they're really trying to choke certain industries that affect America. So they're really going after the rare earths and the rare earths that we need.
Here's one that really baffles me. How could you expect China to do anything else? Was there really any chance that China would just be like, oh, well, yeah, this is fair. Okay, give us the tariffs? There's absolutely zero chance. If there's a more nationalistic country in the world right now than China, I'm not familiar with it and I can't come up with it off the top of my head, right? They had to do this. And if you didn't think this was coming as a member of the Trump administration or Trump, you just got your head in the clouds. I don't even understand what they're thinking if they're surprised by this. And Trump is spouting off like he's surprised. Oh, China's panicking. It's like, I don't think China's panicking. I think they're doing the exact opposite. They're saying, you know what? Sure, give it a go. We're going to do it to you too. Because what these tariffs are going to include, right, are all the agricultural goods. And I think they prohibited some agricultural stuff from coming into China, flat out prohibited it, didn't they? Something. I can't remember what it was now.
I don't remember. But I know soybeans are a big U.S. export.
Yeah, soybeans, and I think maybe chicken or something, some sort of livestock. But these are Trump voters, right? This is the Trump base. If the farmers are like, hey, hold on, we're getting screwed, right? He's going to have to respond. He did before. Here's another chance for Democrats to stand up. I'll be surprised if they stand in the way of aid to farmers because they won't have a good alternative. But this is going to be a problem rather quickly.
Yeah, and to me, before China even enacted the tariffs, something that just shocked me was when China, South Korea, and Japan came out with a joint statement and said that they're going to respond to U.S. tariffs together. These three countries have a really interesting, complicated history, whatever euphemism you want to say. But it is shocking that these three nations would come out against the U.S. together in such a way. It's crazy. I remember during the Biden administration, you and I said, you know what, it's pretty amazing that Biden was able to get Japan and South Korea together at the table. And we're talking about mutual defense agreements, things like that. That was a big deal. And, maybe we should applaud Trump for bringing these three nations together.
And throw China in the mix. That's something. Right?
That's some 4-dimensional diplomacy there.
I guess whatever he's doing escapes me. It's beyond my ability to follow logically. So maybe he's got 6 or 7 dimensions going on. I don't know. Again, I would hope he's got a good plan because we need something to come out of this if you're blowing up the world economic system, right? But I've not seen anything to indicate that, 1, they're that smart, and 2, they're that committed to really suffering through the pain that's already started to happen.
Yeah, and so we've talked about Vietnam and how it's ridiculous that we've, since the Clinton administration, really tried to bring him to the fold to counter China. And to treat an ally like Vietnam the way we've been treating them with these tariffs, it's baffling. So the last major economic power we should talk about is the EU and their reaction. And to no one's surprise, it's been slow and mixed. This is what they do.
They have to get everybody to agree, right. Which with all those countries is a challenge.
Right. So they just came out with a response to the steel and aluminum tariffs that we imposed on them in March.
Mm-hmm.
And the EU is talking about targeting specific industries because the reality is they need our natural gas and oil, due to the war in Ukraine right now. And so they're thinking that they're just going to target our tech and banking sectors because the EU banking sector is fairly strong and they can survive domestically.
Yeah, the thing that I was reading that if I were them, what I would definitely do is go after service imports, right? Mm-hmm. Go after Google, go after Amazon, go after Meta, because there's a massive imbalance there, and they can throw a lot of tariffs on that stuff pretty quickly and cause some serious problems in our economy.
Right. I think the name of the game for them is to find our pressure points. So,
Mm-hmm.
right now, a large amount of Silicon Valley, they're monetarily tied to the Trump administration. So if
Yep.
you can damage that relationship through tariffs, that might be a smart play by them. And in the meantime, there's also talk about exporting goods out of Northern Ireland to skirt the tariffs.
But they get the British rate.
Right.
Just the trivia there for people is that Northern Ireland is part of Great Britain, but also still kind of part of the EU, more or less,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so,
There's when Brexit happened, Northern Ireland was one of the big sticking points, and I don't know the terms of the agreement, but apparently this is an exploit. Now I don't know how effective that's going to be, because why wouldn't Trump just say, okay, well, we're getting a lot of imports out of Northern Ireland, but hey, maybe they won't update their formula on time. So who
it
knows?
seems like it's such a complicated formula; it could take years. Or you never know.
We've tried to make sense of all this, and to be honest, it doesn't make any sense. And I wonder if we run the risk of sort of sane washing this by trying to come up with reasonable explanations and trying to come up with goals for the Trump administration.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, first, I really like that term. I'd not heard that before, and I assume you didn't make it up. I assume you got it somewhere, but I like that. That's a good term, the sane washing. But yeah, I think I do think we need to be careful not to try to, ascribe too much foresight and planning and whatnot to it, because I think a lot of it is Trump is like, hey, this is what we're going to do. Like, why? Because I want to do it. Kind of like, you tie it to sort of the Laura Loomer thing. Laura Loomer comes in his office and says, fire these people. And he's like, yes, fire them. Okay, sure. Why not? That's how, to me, the best way to understand all of this is that it's a Trump whim, right? And it fits with how he views himself. We've talked before about Trump as sort of mob boss foreign policy. Here we are again. We're trying to extort people with our economic might. The real problem when you get into this, are we sane washing or not, is I don't know what we're trying to extort out of them. They don't seem to know what's trying to be extorted out of them. And as a country, the Trump administration, I haven't seen a good rationale for them of what we're trying to get, right? Again, Eric Trump saying, hey, make a deal. But the rest, Donald Trump says, nah, this is what I want to do. So I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, in order to determine if something is successful, we need some sort of metric, and we don't have that. So all I can really see is, hey, is there going to be a media story where a country capitulates? If they do, then that's a win, right?
Yeah,
That's it.
I think the worst thing that's happened to the world economic order is that Trump had a quick win with Colombia. Mm-hmm. Right? If you remember back to when the Colombians said, no, we won't accept military flights with illegal immigrants, right? And Colombia said, we're not going to do that. And Trump said, okay, X% tariffs. And then Colombia said, okay, we'll do it, right? And so it seems to me that is the kind of encouragement that drove us to this. But then he had a concrete goal. Do this, we'll get rid of the tariffs. Am I missing something? Have you seen anything like that?
No.
So I don't even know how we would define we've won. Other than I suspect, right, what will happen, I mean, it's somewhere down the road, is we'll reach some certain point where Trump will decide, you know what, I declare victory and it's over.
Hey, yay.
In the meantime, what can we do, right? There's not a whole lot that Democrats can do on their own, right? They need to have some help from Republicans. But there seems to be starting to be a little bit of interest in acting in Congress on the Republican side. Specifically, there's this bill out by Grassley and Cantwell that's kind of taking away, or at least reeling in, some of the president's powers to give tariffs, where it kind of like the War Powers Act, they have to notify Congress, and then Congress must approve, otherwise it goes away.
Right. So the details there are, you have 48 hours to notify Congress if you're going to make a change to tariff policy on a particular country. And then Congress has to approve that within 60 days. Otherwise, it's going to expire. So yeah, very similar to the War Powers Act. And the way I see it, I do think it has a fairly decent chance of passing. I think you could definitely get 60 votes in the Senate. The Senate, I think, is the easiest part. When you have folks like Ron Johnson who are on the fence here and saying, I don't know, this doesn't seem like a good idea. He's a pretty bagged dude. So, yeah, to me, that seems to suggest that, okay, the Senate is going to have enough votes to pass this policy. The House, on the other hand, is much tougher. And I don't think Mike Johnson is going to bring this to the floor.
No.
Even if you have pressure from the Republicans, you're going to have to use whatever mechanism it is to force a vote. And I do think you could get a majority if you force a vote. I think there are enough, say, Republicans in California, New York, who have their elections on the line in 2026 where they're going to vote yes.
Well, I think the lower the stock market goes, the higher the chances for passing something like this. Right. But then if it does pass, I don't think it'll really matter because there's zero chance that Trump wouldn't veto it.
Yeah, he'll veto it.
And I don't think you're going to get 2/3 of the House to agree to anything, let alone 2/3 to override a Trump veto. That's not realistic to me.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. You're not going to override a Trump veto because if that happened, that shows that the emperor has no clothes, right? You've severely restricted his power and his hold on the party, and then what?
And you basically said this man's a moron. If you override his veto for this, you've said he's an idiot. His signature policy is just wrong, and so they're going to be very reluctant to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if that happened, how would you be able to come up with the GOP tax plan and any other important legislation? You just basically crippled the party. So, yeah, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I think it sends a powerful message if you get both houses to pass something, even if you don't have enough votes to override the veto. It is important for Americans to contact their senators and congressmen and say, hey, my life is being affected by this. My 401k is getting hit hard. I might be fired from my job. I'm paying too much money for X supplies, whatever it is. They will listen.
Yep. Yeah. And I think they'll listen more and more as we get closer and closer to the election, right? Certainly every congressman and congresswoman in the country is paying very close attention to this. And there are some districts which are MAGA enough that they can probably ride it out. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of districts where they're not, right? And as the stock market continues to go in the crapper, because I don't see any quick turnaround coming there, right? And I don't think the people who do the stock trading and the investing believe in that either, right? There's going to be more and more pressure on these representatives to do something. And if you're on record now complaining, right, and if they keep getting more and more complaints, they're going to say, they won't. I don't know that the MAGAs will be like, hey, we're going to pass this shit, even though Trump doesn't want it. But they'll start to put more and more pressure on him, on the people in his administration to do something to help them out. Because at some point, Trump does not want to have a Democratic House after 2026, right? He really doesn't want to do that. All kinds of bad things happen to him if the House becomes Democratic again. So I'm guessing he's going to become a little bit more responsive as we go forward.
Right. And if you want evidence of a pressure campaign working, just look at how the Trump administration had to pull Elise Stefanik's nomination to be UN ambassador. She was in she is in a Trump plus 20 district.
Right. And it's been Republican for a while.
And they looked at the polling and they said, we might lose this in a special election. And, we said that we're going to talk about the special elections in Florida. These were blood red districts. Mm-hmm. And they only won by, I shouldn't say only won, but, they won by 15 points, which in a blood red district that's a warning sign.
Well, one of these districts elected Matt Gaetz, which tells you how their typical voters act, right? Mm-hmm. And if Democrats can, I thought I didn't follow the final results, but I know that there were people thinking it could be close, right? And to me, I wasn't too excited about this because I expected there was going to be one of those races where Democrats get close and lose because they do a lot of that in special elections. The one that really interested me was the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, because That's one where I could see it going either way. And so could apparently Elon Musk, because he dropped $20 million there and tried to buy some votes while he was at it by paying people to nominally sign a petition. And they thought he was paying them to vote. But you know what? Hey, why not? Let him spend his money on that. It's all kinds of good corruption stuff there. But the Democrats smoked the Trumpist guy. So that to me is a good sign. It kind of reinforces what we've been talking about for elections for a long time, even before we started doing the podcast, is that in special elections where the really hardcore voters come out and vote, Democrats have a big advantage. Especially in the Trump era, because a lot of those people don't really like what they see from Trump. When Trump himself is on the ballot, the yahoos come out of the woodwork to vote for him, and they overwhelm the traditional high turnout people. So it's kind of a mix. Now, the good news for Democrats is in the next election, Trump won't be on the ballot in 2026. So the people that come out of the woodwork to vote for him that don't usually vote will probably stay home. And the high turnout, really active Democratic voters will probably turn out. If it ends up being a election kind of like this Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, that'll be very good news for the Democrats, because Republicans were hoping if we get 60% of the Trump voters to turn out, it'll be great for us. They did get 60% of the Trump voters to turn out, and they still got smoked because the Democrats who pay attention to these interim races are really inspired to come out and vote. And hopefully this will continue and even gain more strength if this economic policy is not reversed in short order.
All right. So I think it's a good place to wrap up. And, I don't know how this is going to be reversed, right? I really don't. I have no idea how this is going to end. I don't know if Trump cares that the market is going down anymore. He used to. But not so much anymore. So we'll have to see. There's so many pieces in play right now, not just in America, but all over the world.
Yeah. And like I said, I think it will end, when it does end, by him declaring victory of some sort. What that is, no idea, right? Whether people believe it or not, no idea. I think a lot of that depends on how much damage is done to our economy and the world economy before we get there. And right now, who knows?
On that happy note, make sure you tell your friends about this podcast, like, subscribe, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.